Welcome back, everyone, for our deep dive into a topic that's got more twists and turns than a gripping novel. We're talking about the history of American bookstores.
And believe me, it's a story full of colorful characters, unexpected turns, and even a dash of scandal. You might think of bookstores as peaceful places,
Yeah.
but their journey is anything but.
Yeah, we tend to picture those cozy spots with comfy chairs and that new book smell. But to really get this story, we have to travel back to the 1700s, way back when a bookstore was about as far as you could get from those calming scenes. And to understand how different things were, we got to start with a guy who wasn't exactly a bookseller, but he kind of laid the foundation for everything that came after. Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin, talk about a man of many hats. Printer, publisher, postmaster.
Oh, and don't forget, master of free postage. But seriously, picture his print shop for a sec. Forget peaceful. This place was probably more like a scene out of organized chaos.
It definitely would have been a sight to see.
Printing presses, cranking ink flying everywhere. And I even read an account that mentioned heaps of rags just lying around. Not exactly the kind of place you'd want to curl up with a good book.
It was a working print shop, first and foremost, but it was also a social hub in a way. People would come to grab their mail, newsboys would rush out with the latest edition. It was chaotic, for sure, but there was this energy, this constant exchange of information. And you know what's interesting? From Franklin himself was incredibly disciplined. In his meticulously kept schedule, he dedicated specific hours to reading and reflecting on his goals. This belief in the power of knowledge, in improving yourself through reading, that's a direct link to the role bookstores would eventually play.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think how we went from those chaotic workshops to spaces specifically designed for books. And when it comes to those early bookstores, one of the pioneers was the Old Corner Bookstore in Boston. What fascinates me is that they did something totally revolutionary for the time. They let people browse the shelves.
Now, that's something we take for granted today, but it was a big deal back then.
Yeah.
Before that, it was all about ordering from catalogs or just relying on the bookseller's taste.
So basically, you had to hope your local bookseller had similar taste.
Exactly. But the Old Corner Bookstore, they took a gamble. They said, hey, come on and touch the books, discover something new. They called it their tasting approach, which I love. It was like they were tantalizing the literary palates of Boston's readers.
And they had this secret weapon, their buyer, James Fields. This guy had an incredible eye for talent.
He really did.
He championed some of America's biggest literary figures, Hawthorne Longfellow.
Now, those are names that have stood the test of time.
Of course, nobody's perfect. He famously passed on Wuthering Heights.
Really?
Yeah, he was convinced nobody would want to read it.
Oh, I bet he regretted that one.
I'd say so. But the point is, bookstores were becoming more than just places to buy books. They were turning into these curated spaces for discovery where readers could go on their own literary adventures.
It was a real shift in thinking, don't you think? In just a few decades, bookstores went from a utilitarian necessity to a place of curated discovery.
Exactly. They became destinations in their own right. And as bookstores evolved, so did the whole retail landscape. We're talking about the rise of department stores.
Now that was a game changer.
Right. Imagine walking into a store, and it's not just books. You've got clothes, furniture, housewares, everything you could think of. Books became just one part of this massive consumer experience.
It was a brand new world, and for bookstores, it was a bit of a double-edged sword.
I bet. It's wild to think about those book sections nestled inside these huge department stores. How'd they even compete with all the other stuff vying for people's attention?
Some of them figured it out, and they did it brilliantly. Take Marshall Fields in Chicago. They had this legendary book department. And it was all thanks to their incredible book buyer, Marcella Honer.
Oh, I've heard of her. Wasn't she all about creating an experience for her customers?
Exactly. She was ahead of her time.
I read that she had really specific ways she wanted the books arranged.
Oh, yeah. She had an eye for display and atmosphere.
And she banned phonographs from the book department, right? Something about the noise not mixing with the browsing experience.
Exactly. She understood that browsing was an essential part of the experience, that creating a welcoming and well-organized space, it actually enhanced the joy of discovering a new book.
She sounds like a legend.
Oh, publishers knew how influential she was. Her endorsement could make or break a new release.
Wow, talk about power. But this era also saw the rise of something else that changed the game. Mass market paperbacks. Oh, and self-service bookstores.
Right. Books became more affordable, more portable, easier to get your hands on.
Definitely made reading more accessible to a wider audience.
Absolutely. It was a democratization of reading in a way.
But was there a downside to all this convenience?
Well, it's always a trade-off, isn't it? On the one hand, you've got books becoming cheaper, easier to find, You don't need a guide to navigate the stacks.
You can just pop in, grab what you want, and go. Kind of like the difference between a quick meal and a multi-course dining experience.
That's a great analogy.
Both satisfy your hunger, but in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. With self-service and mass production, something did get lost. That personal connection with a bookseller, someone who knows your taste, who can offer a curated selection.
That human touch.
Exactly. It started to fade away.
It makes you realize that these dilemmas bookstores face today aren't really new. It's this constant push and pull between convenience and curation. But before we jump to the present, there's another fascinating chapter in the history of bookstores that we have to talk about. New York City's legendary Book Row.
Ah, Book Row. No, there's a story. Dozens of used and rare bookstores all lined up one after another, each one bursting with its own unique personality and treasures.
It sounds like a book lover's paradise.
It really was. You could wander through those shops for days, never knowing what you might find tucked away on a shelf.
It sounds like a world away from the sleek modern bookstores you see today. So tell me, what were the characters like? What kind of stories did Book Row hold? I can practically smell the musty pages just imagining it.
Oh, it was an experience. You had a Peter Stammer, for instance, known for his gruff demeanor and this constant aroma of simmering oranges wafting from his shop.
Simmering oranges.
Yeah, apparently he had this thing about oranges.
Gotta love those quirky bookseller habits.
And then you had the Jacks, Biblo, and Tannen. They built their business on late-night erotica sales. But they advertised it discreetly, of course. Rare books and deluxe editions.
I guess you gotta do what you gotta do. But beyond the characters, what strikes me about Book Row is it feels like this little time capsule, this snapshot of a very specific moment in the history of bookselling.
Absolutely. This was a time when bookstores were truly microcosms of their communities, each one with its own personality, its own loyal following. It was a world where passion for books often overshadowed any concerns about profit. You could stumble upon a first edition just tucked between dusty paperbacks.
This sounds like a bibliophile's dream come true. And in the midst of all this, one bookstore rose to prominence for the Strand. 18 miles of... I mean, how could you resist a tagline like that?
The Strand is a fascinating story. They actually started out as this underdog on Book Row, dwarfed by bigger shops like Schulte's, but they had a secret weapon, Fred Bass.
The book-loving mastermind behind the Strand's success.
That's the one they say his passion for collecting books was legendary, like this insatiable need to amass more and more volumes.
I guess you could say he really took the 18 miles of books thing to heart.
He did. And eventually that drive led them to Lee's Book Row and establish the sprawling institution we know today.
That's a big leap, though, leaving the familiarity of Book Row behind.
It was a gamble, no doubt, but it speaks to the changing times. Rents on Book Row were skyrocketing, and Fred Bass, he had this grand vision.
So they took a chance and it paid off.
It did. The Strand's success proved that readers still crave that treasure hunt experience.
Yeah.
The thrill of getting lost in stacks upon stacks of books.
It's like that desire to discover something unexpected. It never really goes away. But Book Row's decline, while a loss, it also coincided with the rise of those sidewalk book vendors we talked about.
It's true, in a way, the love of books just found a new way to thrive. As rents went up and Book Row changed, some booksellers saw an opportunity in setting up shop on the sidewalk.
A true testament to their resourcefulness.
Absolutely. It showed their ability to adapt, to connect with readers in a new way.
And that brings us to what might be the biggest challenge in the history of bookstores: the rise of Amazon. I mean, it's impossible to talk about book selling today without addressing the elephant in the room or the algorithm on the website.
Right, it's the 800-pound gorilla in the bookstore.
How did independent bookstores even begin to compete with that level of convenience?
It was a turning point, for sure. Many simply couldn't weather the storm.
Yeah, a lot of beloved bookstores sadly had to close their doors.
But the ones that survived, they had to become masters of reinvention.
They had to offer something you couldn't get from a few clicks online.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They had to give people a reason to leave their houses and come inside.
And that's where we saw this wave of creativity and resilience.
It's inspiring, isn't it?
Definitely, bookstores started focusing on niche interests, curated selections, author events, community partnerships.
They became more than just places to buy books. They became community hubs.
Exactly. Spaces for connection, for shared passions, for discovering new voices.
It became about the experience. Sure, you can get any book you could possibly want delivered to your doorstep with a few clicks. But bookstores offer something else. A sense of community, the joy of serendipitous discovery, the personal touch of a bookseller who really knows and loves books.
And speaking of book lovers, we can't forget Ann Patchett. the novelist who put her heart and soul into opening Parnassus Books.
Oh, she's wonderful.
She proved that even in the digital age, the allure of a well-curated bookshop is as strong as ever.
Ann Patchett understood something really important. Bookstores could be more than just retail spaces. They could be platforms for community engagement, for starting conversations, for amplifying diverse voices.
And she put that belief into action.
She did. She created a haven for book lovers, and in doing so inspired a whole new generation of bookstore owners.
Her story and the stories of countless other independent booksellers, they really highlight the enduring power of books and the communities they create.
It's a testament to something.
They remind us that even in a world dominated by screens and algorithms, there's something magical about stepping into a bookstore, breathing in that scent of paper and ink and getting lost in a world of stories.
It's an experience unlike any other.
It really is.
So to circle back to your earlier question about the future of bookstores, it's tough to say for certain what the future holds. But if their past is any indication, they'll find a way to adapt, to evolve, to continue to remind us of the simple joy of connecting with fellow book lovers in the real world.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we come to the end of our deep dive into the history of American bookstores. It's a story full of unexpected twists and turns, much like the books you find within their walls. We hope this journey has given you a deeper appreciation for these cultural havens, and maybe even inspired you to rediscover the joy of getting lost in a good book. Until next time, happy reading.